When I learned about the deaths of Andrew and his son, Zachary, I felt that this is one of those stories that cannot be forgotten, that needs to be told. It's a true crime story, yes, but it's more than that, because it's a story that involves the loyalty of a childhood friendship and the absolute love of Andrew's parents and Zachary's grandparents. Three people who honored and immortalized the innocent victims of a tragedy that was foretold and ignored by the Canadian justice system. But before we get into the details of this episode, I ask that you check your subscription here on the channel. Please activate all notifications so you don't miss any episodes. This really helps our work here. If you can, become a member. This is also very important and actively contributes to our productions. We're always trying to improve each time. For you, okay? That's it. Leave a like or a comment, even if it's just an emoji. That already helps me a lot. Also, because of the data, let's get to the facts. Charismatic, opinionated.
He is a good historian. He had a gift. He had the worst gas. He will be a great doctor. He will be a doctor. He
will be great. Great doctor. He is a doctor. Newfoundland in Canada, Shirley Jane. He will be a great doctor. 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 Until her parents' divorce and her mother's decision to return to her home country changed things a bit, and she took Shirley back home. I know what her life was like at that time, or what her relationship was like, for example, with her father. After all that, no mention in the sources worth noting, I would say. What we can say is that she had a well-defined professional goal in her mind, and so, around the age of 19, she enrolled at Memorial University of Newfoundland to study medicine. But alongside her academic life, her personal life was also happening, right, guys? In the winter of the following year, when she started college, that is, in the winter of 1981, the college student got married while already pregnant and preparing for the arrival of her first child, who was born on July 9, 1982, and the husband and father of the baby was possibly a boyfriend from high school. From what the sources here suggest, it's not easy to keep all the plates of life spinning. You know, those plates that need to keep turning so they don't fall to the ground. And then comes a link, maybe from a future chain, right? Did he want it? Did he have the will for it? Did he see that as a stumbling block along the way? We still don't know. The agreement between the couple, Shirley and her husband, was that he would stay at home taking care of the baby while she continued her studies. But other things happened, moving to another city and a second pregnancy in 1985. This time, it was a little girl who came into the world. The sources also mention another romantic relationship she had at that time, but we don't really know how all of that happened. Anyway, our character's first marriage ended in January of '88. In other words, that link, the first link in the chain that I mentioned, seems to make a bit of sense, doesn't it? She also passes away during a third pregnancy, which was interrupted, but no one even knows who the father of that child was because the dates in her biography are really strange. Despite that, another marriage took place in July of '88. Then, 2 years later, on March 8, 1990, she gave birth to another little girl, daughter of Corner Brook, who was her husband at that time. There, that marriage lasted less than the previous one, and in 1991, Shirley was single once again. During this period, she completed her medical degree while raising her 3 children with financial help from her second husband. And it's important to point out some relevant events here, okay? Later on, they were mentioned by police investigators. Since 1988, Shirley Turner had been receiving a specific pension, which was meant to be a future scholarship for her children. Well, it's an American thing, you know, to save up in advance for college expenses. However, she had spent it all on herself, claiming that later, as a well-paid doctor, she would probably be able to replace the money. Which never really happened. In 1993, an anonymous tip revealed that Shirley was abusive and physically violent with her children, doing this under the claim that she was educating them. The case was closed on January 11, 1994, without any interviews being conducted with her. And when her second marriage ended, she was granted custody of her daughter, but a few days later she sent the girl back to live with her father in the United States. Her other two children, from her first marriage, were sent to their paternal grandmother's house in Persons Pond, which is a Canadian village currently with about 360 residents, a place where half of the existing houses are uninhabited. A somewhat troubled personal life, I think. As various events prove, the consequences of our choices are probably felt by people close to us, in her case by her own children. Or does anyone here disagree with that? Alright, so now we're going to talk about her professional life, about Dr. Shirley, and how she loved Andrew David Bagby obsessively until she killed him. But I think you already knew that her entry into our story here could only be through her connection with Andrew and Zach. Aren't they our characters mentioned back in the introduction of this episode? Between 1998 and 2000, she worked as a resident doctor in university hospitals throughout the Newfoundland region, up in Canada. But things weren't going very well. In 1999, during her residency at a family practice, Dr. Turner's supervising physician criticized her professionalism. In response, she became quite hostile, yelling, crying, and accusing the chief physician of treating her unfairly. In 2000, she had her second residency period, and it seems like it was kind of a remediation or repeating a year, you know? And at that time, she also caused problems. To start with, Dr. Turner missed 9 days in 3 months and forged clinical reports. A patient at the clinic even refused to return after an appointment with her, demanding to be seen by another doctor. At the follow-up, the team was so concerned about her behavior when she was confronted with feedback. Didn't they decide to change their strategy and never have any important conversation with her alone, in private? In other words, to avoid false accusations of harassment or even worse. Professional conversations were then always held with several people present, people who could, if necessary, testify to what actually happened during those interviews, those conversations. Now imagine this happening inside a hospital environment. A supervising doctor from that time stated that he had the impression he was being manipulated whenever he spoke with Shirley. For example, when negative aspects or some criticism came up, she would change the subject and accuse him, the supervising doctor, of having even greater flaws. In other words, she tried to justify or minimize her own behavior by talking about someone else's mistakes. The way she manipulated the situation was by shifting the focus and pointing the finger at others. That doctor, who later contributed to the investigations related to her, stated that Shirley could be charming, friendly, and lively, but when confronted with a lie, she would become irritated, accusatory, and loud. That kind of seduction, maybe from people who are psychopaths. In short, she seemed... I'm not making a diagnosis, I'm just giving my layman's perception here, really, in short, guys. She seemed to enjoy putting on a show like she was playing a role, but essentially it was like she didn't feel anything for the job. There was no love for the profession, no real interest in the well-being of the patients. She didn't interact emotionally with other people who came to her with their pain, illnesses, and fears. And this professional here, the doctor, he also says that compared to the more than 400 residents he has supervised over the past 21 years, Shirley had been the most superficial trainee, with the worst personal approach and no professional commitment that he knows, just so you know, at least that was his opinion, okay? However, for better or worse, she graduated and earned the right to practice medicine. And so it doesn't sound like a true crime narration drama. Sources say that the experience with resident Shirley Turner led St. John's University to make constructive changes in its medical students' residency evaluation process. In other words, things were pretty serious. So much so that years later, that doctor there, Dr. Turner's former supervisor, stated to the Office of Child and Youth Advocacy that she was a psychopath, manipulative, and without remorse. This thing about having an evaluation is important, right? Think about it. Even a lawyer needs to pass the bar exam, right? To be able to practice. Sometimes you get some guys who, I don't know, were forced to study medicine without any talent for dealing with people, right? Especially people in situations like this, right? Anyway, Dr. Turner here is, I don't know, a symbol of that. Well, around 1996, she started a new personal relationship with a man named Miles Dosset, who was 13 years younger than her. What's relevant about this story is that she became a stalker. After the breakup, since Miles moved to another place, in Newfoundland, she harassed him through phone calls. But in November 1997, things got even more complicated, with a personal confrontation when Shirley hit Miles in the face with one of her high heels. And the parents of this young man, who must have been around 22 years old at the time, then decided that he should stay away from his ex. That's why in 1998 he moved to Pennsylvania in the United States. Shirley kept calling and leaving voicemails, threatening messages, and also making unexpected visits to Miles's apartment. And all sorts of things happened, okay? Death threats, police reports, restraining orders, and police officers repeatedly having to remove her from the door of the guy's place. Until on April 7, 1999, Miles Dosset found the woman lying outside his apartment, semi-conscious after taking an overdose of sleeping pills. Something that could have led Shirley to death. Isn't that just like her, always being as dramatic as possible? She was wearing a black dress, carrying a bouquet of red roses, and had 2 farewell letters with her. My goodness. One letter had been addressed to Miles. The reason behind all this craziness, since she couldn't accept being rejected and would rather kill herself than be without Miles. The reason. Maybe I shouldn't say that, poor guy, right? The guy just wanted to keep this woman away, man. The other letter was for her psychiatrist with the words, "I'm not bad, just sick." But even though she was barely alive, she was rushed to a hospital where she had her stomach pumped and survived. Even so, the next day, she still called Miles and said, "Dr. Turner died last night." Guys, it's all really bad, isn't it? Really bad, but hold on, it's going to get worse. That same year, 1999, Shirley started dating Andrew David Bagby, an American medical student who was in his 3rd year at Memorial University. A young guy, also about 12 years younger than her. He was from California, the only son of Kathleen and David Bagby. His mother was a midwife and registered nurse, and his father, a computer engineer and a veteran of the United States Navy. Andrew was described as a brilliant guy. He had a large network of friends and had spent his teenage years making movies with his best friend, who dreamed of becoming a filmmaker. So, Andrew's entire life was recorded on video. Both real events, like his journey as a scout, soccer games, and high school graduation, as well as his performances as an amateur actor. We don't know how his relationship with Shirley began, since that relationship started after the period of her husband's obsessive stalking. But here I can guess that there were emotional ups and downs, and it probably wasn't easy for a young man to be with a complicated woman. With that background and given the extreme passions that Dr. Turner had, things must have been rough, as people say around here. Besides, of course, the fact that she seemed to have some kind of disorder. Well, in August 2000, she moved to Iowa to start working at Tremark Systems Corporation. Meanwhile, Andrew got a surgical residency at State University in New York. Despite the distance between the states, the two lovers initially tried to maintain a long-distance relationship. As expected, she didn't leave Andrew alone and visited his residency in New York 7 times, while he visited her only once there in Iowa. What is known is that Dr. Turner even broke into her boyfriend's property, forcing her way in, On that occasion, she turned the apartment upside down, investigating Andrew's life. After that tumultuous year of 2000 and 2001, Andrew went to Pennsylvania and started his residency at a family practice. Shirley also moved to the United States in that same year, 2001, and obtained a permit to buy a firearm, a Phoenix Arms high-power .22 pistol. She didn't waste any time and also took shooting and firearm handling classes. The relationship had already soured and Andrew Bagby put an end to their story. But, to no one's surprise, the doctor showed possessive behavior toward the young man and harassed him over the phone. Finally, on October 13, 2001, she told Andrew that she was 3 months pregnant. Because of that, he agreed to meet with her and talk. Of course, it all turned into an argument, where the main topic was his new girlfriend. Because, from the young doctor's point of view, the relationship had been a mistake and it was better to leave their story behind. Shirley ended up confessing that the pregnancy was a lie, the well-known trick of pretending to be pregnant to keep her boyfriend. That made Andrew furious, so he gave Shirley a ride to Arnold Palmer Regional Airport and said goodbye to her. Less than 20 days later, on November 4, 2001, she started calling the guy insistently again, and since he wasn't answering her calls, the solution she found was to drive 16 hours to his house, bringing her little gun and ammunition in her luggage. On the night of November 4th to 5th, they argued at Andrew's doorstep. In the end, the two agreed that Shirley should calm down, and they saw each other again that night. There was a new round of accusations, because obviously they weren't going to reach any understanding. That meeting was the last one. The next day, Andrew Bagby didn't go to work and didn't answer his girlfriend's calls. His body was found in the parking lot of Keystone State Park in Derry Township, Pennsylvania. He had been shot 5 times in the face, chest, buttocks, and the back of the head. Next, it was the basic investigative work of the police, who took into account information from the victim's relatives, friends, and acquaintances. And soon they put together a scenario where the only person in the universe with an interest in killing Dr. Andrew Bagby was his ex-girlfriend, Dr. Shirley Jane Turner. When she was investigated, as you can imagine, she told a bunch of lies about her whereabouts that day. But the truth was discovered. There were digital footprints in 2001. Not as simple as today's, but still. The doctor was tracked, including her purchase of the gun and the shells found next to Andrew's body. The detectives even tracked down a box of condoms bought on the day of Andrew's death. Unfortunately, by the time the authorities obtained an arrest warrant for her, Shirley had already fled the United States. And then we get to the final chapters of this story. Pregnancy, 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 pregnancy. Pregnancy for Shirley A. Turner. In Canada, an extradition process began so she could answer for her crime in the United States. What we know is that on November 12, 2001, Shirley left her residence and flew to Toronto, settling in St. John's with her oldest son. The big surprise came about 20 days later when the joint police forces of both countries who were monitoring Shirley found a copy of a recent ultrasound in her trash showing that she really was pregnant. The pregnancy was very recent, matching the dates of her visits to her ex-boyfriend, who is now dead. So she was arrested and the process of her extradition began, even though she was a defendant in a homicide case. The judge in the case believed that Dr. Shirley Turner, who was 40 years old at the time, did not pose a threat to society. With that, she was released from the Women's Correctional Center, where she was being held, and was required to pay bail of about 75,000 Canadian dollars. Handing over her passports, making weekly visits to the police, and promising not to contact Andrew Bagby's family is trusting too much. I wasn't thinking about anything else here, right? When we go back to her biography, you say, wow, she has 3 children. How is that? Did she have time to keep focusing on a failed thing like these relationships? I don't know, right? It's really crazy, isn't it, guys, right? The person who helped this killer pay her bail was her psychiatrist, John Dossett, a former colleague from Memorial University. Do you remember him? Yeah, that's totally unethical, isn't it? Maybe it's not, but the news that Shirley Turner was pregnant with Andrew's child turned the case from a simple extradition into a much more complex and high-profile one. because now it involved the custody of the victim's child, and that had emotional consequences. Jurídicos. Because of the possibility of getting custody of their grandson, David and Kathleen Bagby, Andrew's parents moved to Canada to closely follow every step of this process. And it's important to mention here that Andrew's parents, in an emotional interview, described how devastating it was to receive the news of the death of their only son, and how they made plans to take their own lives. They thought that existence no longer had any meaning, not without Andrew. So, when they returned to their city with their son's body inside a coffin, they imagined a reunion soon. But with the unexpected news of the existence of a baby, Andrew's son, everything changed. Living could somehow once again have meaning. But at first, when Zachary Andrew Turner was born on July 18, 2002, it was the mother who received his legal custody. Even though Shirley was about to be extradited, even though she was a murderer, and even though she had killed the baby's father, she denied that the paternal grandparents knew the boy and dismissed her lawyer who thought differently. Dude, look at this. However, rights and the law prevailed, and the Bagby couple were able to meet and interact with their grandson. It was reported that on several occasions, Zachary showed little attachment to his mother and preferred the company of his grandparents. Oh, come on. This truth was seen and recorded at Zachary's first birthday party, held at a McDonald's. Shirley even said to Mrs. Kathleen, "My son loves you more than he loves me, so why don't you take him?" That was all the grandparents wanted, wasn't it? But the judicial mess continued, with Shirley Turner going to jail in November 2002, while a decision from the federal Minister of Justice about her extradition to the United States was still pending. Still in this deadlock, in January 2003, the judge in the case released her again, arguing that the murder was not directed at the general public and that Shirley Turner was presumed innocent. To put all this nonsense in simple terms, I don't know if it was a gross translation error. I would say she was there at that moment, enjoying the benefit of the doubt until the trial was concluded. In fact, the second tragedy in this story happened on August 18, 2003. Little Zachary was legally in his mother's custody. When she decided to put an end to the issues that tormented her, love and rejection, custody of the baby, extradition, trial, and a bleak future. She chose a shorter path, which involved stopping by a pharmacy and buying the medication lorazepam. After mixing this medicine into her son's bottle, she herself took an overdose of it. Then she tied the baby to her chest with her own shirt and jumped into the sea. More specifically, she jumped from a fishing pier into the Atlantic Ocean. Later, her body was found on a beach by a vacationing couple, and the baby's body was found afterwards, not far from the mother. The autopsies determined that Shirley Turner drowned, and also that little Zachary Turner was unconscious due to lorazepam, so he did not suffer. I think we don't even need to mention how this affected the little boy's grandparents, who saw him as a comfort after losing their son. Now there was an absolute zero in their lives, me. The homicide-suicide case involving a woman who was charged with the murder of her ex-boyfriend and father of her fourth child. It obviously shocked Canada and the United States, and it led to a critical analysis of the child protection legal systems of the Canadian province where the woman lived, as well as Canada's bail laws. I'm not an expert on Canadian law, but it seemed to me to be a matter of discrepancy for a country. If attempted in the United States, this likely would have been avoided. It may not be entirely true, but in Canada it feels that way, right? For a harm, benefit of the doubt, until a baby paid for this stupidity. A 2006 investigation found serious deficiencies in the way the province's social services system handled the case, suggesting that judges, prosecutors, and child welfare agencies failed. Protecting Zachary, child welfare is almost comical and ironic, isn't it? In a completely morbid situation, at the end of the investigation, it was concluded that Zachary's death could have been prevented. Obviously, it was a crime foretold, just a matter of time, but the threat was completely ignored and neglected because they thought the woman would... Right? It's really crazy, right? There's a conflict of ideas within this issue, isn't there? Anyway, everything around it is completely disregarded. In the name of what? A second chance for her? Well, maybe, but only under very strict supervision, right? By the state, which must also protect others' lives. This heinous crime led to the approval of Bill C-464, or Zachary's Bill, which strengthened bail conditions in Canadian courts in cases involving the welfare of children. On May 3, 2006, a disciplinary board convened by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Newfoundland found Dr. John Dossett, that psychiatrist who was a friend of the murderer, guilty of professional misconduct for his involvement in helping and paying Shirley's $75,000 bail. He was also ordered to pay a $10,000 fine and was required to undergo psychiatric counseling. And we can only say he was a pretty incompetent professional who didn't recognize the signs his friend was giving in relation to being capable of taking her ex-boyfriend's life. And after the son, right? 5 months after that, in October 2006, the medical examiner Peter Markstein released the Turner Review and investigation, which concluded that Zachary's death was preventable. This report pointed out serious failures in the social services system there in Newfoundland and also in Labrador, because this system, as a whole, did not protect the child from his mother. Nowhere did I find a continuous assessment of the children's safety needs, said this report. There you go. Dr. Andrew Bagby, a promising doctor, died at the age of 28, cowardly shot by his ex-girlfriend. Andrew never even got to know that he would be the father of Zachary Turner, a beautiful boy whose life was also taken by the hands of this monster in the form of a woman. This case, completely cruel and almost unbelievable, caused a commotion and led to several concrete actions. We can mention that Kurt Cunney, Andrew's best friend, said since their teenage years. In 2008, he made a beautiful and highly awarded documentary called Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. This work was made up of videos from Kurt and Andrew's teenage years in California and features interviews with his parents, relatives, friends, classmates, and co-workers. Also, there are images from before and after Zachary's murder, actually, including scenes of Zachary in July 2003 at his first birthday celebration, just a month before his death. Then, on October 23, 2009, Canadian Member of Parliament Scott Andrews introduced the so-called Bill, Zachary's Bill, which would amend the Canadian Criminal Code to allow courts to justify denying bail to those accused of serious crimes in order to protect their children. Andrews, this parliamentarian said, after the law, Zachary's grandparents were able to feel that someone had heard their cries, so that something so tragic would never happen again. David Bagby, Andrew's father and Zachary's grandfather, wrote a book about the case in 2007. Danced with the Devil, Memoirs of Murder and Loss. That is, Dancing with the Devil, Memoirs of a Murder and Loss. Finally, 2 scholarships were created in honor of Andrew David Bagby and his son. Named the Dr. Andrew David Bagby Family Medicine Scholarship. It is intended for medical students from a hospital in that region, and almost 40 students have already benefited from this award. There is also the Dr. Andrew Bagby and Son Zachary Scholarship Fund, which provides financial support to students at Memorial University in Newfoundland. These actions gave meaning to Andrew's parents' lives. Yeah, it was a foretold case, wasn't it? Because there was a history of a very troubled life with several persecutions. With other exes, there was systematic persecution. But with Andrew, right? It was something that kept escalating. There was the murder, which I don't know how poorly it was investigated. There was no extradition, right? What happened there in the jurisdiction? So, yeah, there were. All the signs pointing to an even bigger tragedy were simply ignored in a surreal, absurd, regrettable way. Completely regrettable. I don't know how these people who have the power, who are responsible for all this, can lay their heads on the pillow at night. Anyway, sometimes I believe in karma, and I think this one is heavy, huh? I really appreciate your company. Leave a comment here for me. What did you think about all this? A kiss from the redhead. Próximo episódio.